Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the policy board to order here. My name is Joe Cimino. I'm the Administrative Commissioner for New Jersey. I'll be chairing the meeting today. So let's get started. Go through the approval of the agenda. Are there any items that folks want to add to the agenda today? Not seeing any. We'll consider the agenda approved and approval of the proceedings from the October 24 meeting. Any concerns with what was put forward for the proceedings for October meeting? Not seeing any. Okay, great. So we'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment to come before the policy board? Not seeing any on public comment. We do have one item that we would like to add to the agenda, so I'm going to go to Dan for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a letter that we intend to ask, I'm sorry, that the Lobster Board has created a motion to ask this policy board to draft a letter to the states of Maine and New Hampshire concerning the reneging on addendum 27, which was the minimum size increases predominantly among some other measures. And so that should be added to this agenda this morning.
Thank you, Dan. And it's not uncommon for letters to come before the policy board. We typically take that up at the towards the end of the agenda. And I think we could give a little bit of background, since obviously not all of our policy board members are on Lobster Board, and there's a lot going on there. So we'll give a little bit of a background before we vote on that letter. So we'll move into the executive committee report. I'm so mad at Dan for making me eat something because I have a mouthful. I don't know why I did that. Sorry.
One more.
Oh, good. I could go to Bob for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just making stuff up so you can finish chewing. No, there's one other business item.
I don't know why I did that.
With the Mid-Atlantic Council and their consideration for a potential control rule that we wanted to talk about. Chelsea and Tracy will give a quick background on that under other business as well.
Thank you, Bob. Okay. I think I'm ready. So we had some very good discussions at executive committee, and actually I'm going to start by turning it back over to Bob for an update on the particularly a CARES update and NOAA grants management.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think looking around the table, a lot of folks were in here during the executive committee when I gave this update, but you know, the commission staff, Laura and I in particular, continue to wrestle with this grants management issue within NOAA. I think, you know, everyone has heard the background on it. We distributed money through working with the states under the CARES Act, and some of those distributions were declared to be unallowable, and we to a total of about 7.3 million. We're working with NOAA grants management to resolve that issue. We've got the total down to about 5.8, 5.9 million now. We've got a lot of other paperwork that's being transmitted to NOAA, and we're hopeful that that'll get us down to about 3 million if all those different documentation and different analyses and auditing and everything else is accepted by grants management. We'll get down to that lower number. But as I talked about earlier, you know, 3 million-ish is still a very big number for the commission. We don't have that kind of money available. So we're going to keep working with the individuals that were determined to be unallowable, but you know, at the end of this process, we are not going to be able to recoup all the funds that are that NOAA grants management indicates ASMFC owes back to the federal government. You know, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, 2 of the individuals have passed away that are from New Jersey, and how do we go after those funds? And those are big checks, you know, about hundreds of thousands of dollars each, actually. So, you know, we're gonna continue to work on this. It does take a lot of time. We were granted a 1-year extension, so we have until December 4th of this year to work through this before we have to start any repayment in the eyes of the federal government. We are not accruing interest right now, which is a good thing. But, you know, we're gonna, somewhere at the end of this, no matter how hard we try, we're not gonna get all that money back. And how do we seek forgiveness or a legislative fix is something we're actively talking about. Alexander and I have a couple meetings on the Hill on Friday to have some initial conversations with a few New Jersey offices to figure out a potential legislative fix. So, you know, there are other forgiveness options, but they're pretty lengthy, and you know, maybe this is very self-serving, but if we could not have this hanging over us for multiple years, I think that would be a good thing. So we're gonna keep working on it. Happy to answer any questions. It's a, you know, it's a big issue that we need to sort out, and we're working pretty hard on it. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions for Bob? Not seeing any? Great. We'll move on to the next update from XCOM, and I'll go through the executive committee reviewed a white paper provided by staff that looked at declared interest and voting procedures. In particular, the difference between virtual meetings in public or in person only or hybrid meetings. You know, there was actually a fairly lengthy discussion by XCOM members confirming how valuable the ability to have hybrid meetings has been, including public participation. But there was some discussion about guardrails on voting for certain items. If an entire state delegation is not able to make it to a particular meeting, a motion came out of the executive committee. Perhaps if we can get that motion up to put before policy board, I don't know that we necessarily need a motion to approve that, but I would like all the commissioners to see that if some of the folks around the table were not at XCOM. And I would like to just, any hands, if there's discussion that needs to be had or concerns with this idea that XCOM would like to move forward with. And I guess, I don't know, maybe, yeah, let me just read that out. So on behalf of the executive committee, move for meetings where the whole of a state delegation cannot attend in person, a meeting for reasons beyond their control. The delegation may request to the executive director, the commission chair, and board chair for a postponement of a particular action for consideration at the next scheduled regular meeting or out of cycle meeting. So let me get into that a little bit. That could be a lot to unpack if you have not been following this discussion. You know, the idea behind this is it's always more beneficial to be here in person, to have discussions. You know, I personally know that after well over a decade on the board, trying to describe to the higher ups what may happen at a board meeting is a complete challenge, right? Because we all have material that's prepped, but we don't know where a discussion may go. We don't know, without the sideboards that we have on discussions for motions. And so the idea behind this is there may be a need to delay if a delegation is not able to be there in person. However, there is some odd potential that without any accusations that a delegation may purposely not show up if there was a very tough decision to make. And so that gets to the if an item is out of their control, they may request this. And then I think, you know, the idea that there are going to be times where an item is so time sensitive that it's going to be very tough to say, we'll just delay this until another meeting. And so part of this motion is that we would be able to delay but create a special meeting for this, or simply deny the request. So I hope that's enough background on this. Is there any discussion on this motion coming through from the executive committee? Is there any objection to this? Not seeing any. Okay, I appreciate that. Other items? Yes. So the executive committee is going to continue to discuss the declared interest element of this. You know, I don't think that's been revisited in quite some time. That's in the commission's rules and regulations on how a state can declare interest. So we do have the ability to revisit that. It's not part of the Atlantic Coastal Act. So we'll continue to have discussions on that, and also on the state management units and de minimis. And as those discussions move forward, we'll continue to bring those to policy board. Okay. We had a legislative update from Alexander. He went through a summary of what happened in the last Congress, and then talked to us about the turnover that's happened, and as always, as the commission has offered states the ability to meet their new legislators. And I'll just say that, well, I'll just open it up if there's any questions for Alexander on that. Okay, great. Not seeing any. We also talked about future meetings. I'll just go through the two most recent. So we'll be in Dewey Beach, Delaware in October this year, and then we'll be somewhere in Rhode Island next year. And that covers the XCOM summary. Any questions on what happened at XCOM? Great, not seeing it. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Alexander for the review of the 2024 Commissioner Survey.
I have a brief presentation on the 2024 Commissioner Survey results. In 2024, 28 commissioners, next slide please. 28 commissioners completed this year's survey. This was a decrease by 5 from 2023's survey. The average score of all the questions has hovered around 8.0 for the last 3 years. Next slide please. Highlights from the 10-point scale questions. Question 4, cooperation with our federal partners has consistently year after year scored as our lowest question with an average of 6.87 over 16 years. Sentiment has declined dramatically since a high of 7.97 in 2018. Some of the discussion around this question points to the NOAA's handling of the New Jersey CARES Act issue as damaging our relationship with our federal partners. Question 3, satisfaction with cooperation between commissioners to achieve commission's vision saw the largest drop off this year by 0.65 points. In some of the longer open-ended questions, people pointed to political issues and putting politics over the needs of the biology of the resource as a large reason for decline in cooperation between commissioners. Utilization and availability of commission resources consistently scores at the top of our survey. The efficient and effective utilization of fiscal and human resources is a particular highlight with a 15-year average of 8.94. Question 10, engagement with state legislators and members of Congress saw the largest score increase in the survey by 0.72 points. This may be a potential source of bias is the fact that I send out the survey each year. And those who are likely to engage and read my emails may be more likely to view my activities favorably. There are, next slide, please. The discussion question summaries. It was difficult to summarize many of these questions because they address such wide-ranging issues. I really encourage each of you to go back and look at some of the unabridged answers that are included in the memo. They tackle lots of different issues. As I mentioned before, question 17, obstacles to the commission's success in rebuilding stocks. One of the common answers this year that was new was politics being and stakeholder impacts, economic impacts being prioritized over the resource management. That was a new one this year. Question 18, useful products produced by the commission was easy to summarize because nearly every product was mentioned. Next slide, please. Additional products the commission could provide. Many of these questions pointed at the need to communicate more concisely, communicate in a way that was targeted at folks who are not necessarily well-versed in fisheries management. We use a lot of acronyms. Reduce the amount of acronyms that we use would be good, and really just produce more products written with the layman in mind. Issues that the commission should focus more on. A lot of these mentioned the kind of obstacles to commission success and a lot of existential issues that the commission faces. This includes addressing climate change impacts, incorporation of socioeconomics was mentioned multiple times, innovating on communication strategies like in question 19. Those are the main highlights. Additional comments, question 21. Many commissioners declined to answer this question, but many of those who did commented on how thankful they are for the staff, which was appreciated. One comment showed concern about political influence over management of horseshoe crab and menhaden. Another mentioned concerns about keeping up with the demands for non-administrative commissioners. Those are the main highlights of the 2024 Commissioner Survey results. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alexander. I'll look for any questions, but also just any general comments that commissioners may want to make on the survey or questions for Alexander. All right, not seeing. Oh, there we go, John.
Yeah, I just had a question now, and I may have asked this before. Is there any way that when we do the survey, we can get a copy of our answers? Because I just keep every year, it's pretty much the same survey, and I keep wondering, what did I do with last year on this one?
Yes, I can certainly look into that. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any other questions or comments on the survey? Not seeing any. Okay. Our next agenda item is actually, we thought we might need to spend more time on the white paper on voting procedures that went through XCOM. And very briefly, I'll look to see if there are any comments on that. I'm not going to go back through it. I think I covered it, as best I could in the executive committee summary. Okay. Not seeing anything. That's good. We can move on. Oh, yep. Go ahead, Dan.
Just a minor issue, and this kind of got bypassed because we had more substantive conversations about remote meetings. But I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for staff to announce at the beginning of a meeting which of the board members are remote and are acting as voting members, because I think just that would be helpful. And then alternatively, sometimes there could be a board member like myself who sat at the striped bass meeting, but I had no placard. I wanted the front row seat, but I wasn't a member. I wasn't a voting member of the board. And if the board chair could also explain that. So just so other board members are clear about who's present and accounted for.
Thanks, Dan. Dennis?
Yes.
You know, to that, Dan, at the striped bass meeting, you were sitting there, and I think there was another commissioner, but you appropriately didn't participate. And that's always been a clear way of how we operate, that normally you might sit at the back of the table, but in instances, I think, where you're announced that you're not a participating member, that's fine.
I guess I'm requesting maybe as a protocol, the board chair could work with staff and identify who's online as an active board member and who's here and is not. That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think that's a very reasonable request. I know as a Mid-Atlantic Council rep, some of our most important species are actually jointly managed, and it is very important to know what board members are actually represented and need to have a different priority level of recognition during discussions. So that is a good recommendation, an important practice. As far as board members that may sit at members that may sit at the table that aren't on a particular board, I think that would be kind of, I would say, up to that board member to point it out first to staff why they're there at the table and that they have no intent to participate. And then yes, we could go that step further of bringing that to the board chair for discussion. So I appreciate that. Any other comments on that? Okay, not seeing any. Then I'll turn it over to Katie for an update on the ongoing stock assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first issue is an issue that's been referred to the policy board by the Striped Bass Board. So if you recall yesterday, we talked about the fact that we have begun the 2027 benchmark assessment for striped bass. And because of the workload of that assessment, the TC recommended that the tentatively scheduled 2026 update for striped bass not be conducted. And so the board agreed with the TC on that recommendation, and so is recommending that the policy board remove that tentatively scheduled assessment update for striped bass in 2026 from the assessment schedule. I don't believe the policy board needs to make a formal motion, but I think the policy board does need to provide consensus on that recommendation. So I'll pause here and see if there's any questions or discussion on that item.
Well, Katie, if I may, as a board member, I will just reiterate, since not everyone is on that board, my support for that. And part of the reasoning is, benchmarks are so important to revisit all the elements and hopefully move forward, our understanding of the science. My particular concern with striped bass is if we got an update on what we are currently doing that talks about, the projections for the stock, and then just a few months later, we had a different assessment. I think there could be a great deal of confusion for board members, for the public, on what that means for our understanding of the stock. And so I fully support this notion of, the peer review is in the spring of March of 2027. That's really not that far away. A lot of preparatory work is going to go into this. There is a consistency or continuity run, excuse me. So we still will have that understanding of looking back at what the old assessment would have told us. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any objections or hands, so I'll, thank you, sorry. So I'll assume that there's consensus then that we can move forward, skipping the 2026 update and moving on with the benchmark in 2027. I'm seeing heads nod, thank you.
So the only other issues we wanted to bring before the board were just some updates on species that have current assessments ongoing but did not have a board meeting this cycle. First, probably most important would be weakfish, which was scheduled to have the assessment update presented at this winter meeting. However, we are behind schedule on some of the data preparation and model runs, and we're not able to present at this meeting, but we plan to present at the May meeting, and we plan to still have those runs completed in time to support the ongoing ERP assessment. The ERP assessment will have an assessment workshop the first week of March. That's the last in-person workshop for this group as we proceed to peer review in mid-August of this year. The M work group, the natural mortality work group, is still working to finalize their decision and recommendation on a potential change to the M estimate for the base run of the single species Menhaden model. That will be, again, also completed in time to support the ERP assessment so that that decision and that change can be peer reviewed as well. And finally, the TTOG assessment update is scheduled for completion at the end of this year, and we've begun that data process. The TTOG SAS has been quite depleted by some departures and retirements, so we will be reaching out to the TTOG board to approve sort of a refreshed SAS. We will not be doing a full nomination process to completely revise the SAS, but we will be replacing some members and getting board approval on that front. But we've already put out the call for data so that we can get this assessment going and completed at the end of this year to be presented at the annual meeting for 2025. And that's all the updates that I have. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Katie. Questions for Katie on any of those updates? Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Sorry, TTOG is an update or a benchmark?
It is an update at this point. We don't have it on the schedule for a benchmark but I think that's something that, you know, the Assessment Science Committee and the board could discuss going forward. But for this one, it's purely an update.
Yeah, so thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, you know, I don't think maybe right now is the time to talk about, but I think getting a benchmark on a lot has changed with the tools for assessing stocks, in particular, the way TTOG is done now. It's just kind of like a bunch of standalone statistical catch at age models, and now there's a lot of models are moving away from that particular software, and the spatial aspect of it is something else that can be accommodated now in a benchmark process. I think that's it'd be a big step forward for TTOG and would be good to get that on the schedule at some point.
Thanks, Jay. I'll look to either Bob or Katie to just, because I apologize for my ignorance, but the process to make that decision on, you know, are we ready and who, does that come back to us to make that decision? Or?
Yeah, so I think the process would be, as we go through the assessment update this year, we'll consult with the TC and the SAS and talk about, you know, what progress have we made in terms of, are there any new data sources? Are there new modeling approaches that we could use, et cetera? Is a benchmark warranted? And when would be like what kind of a timeline are we doing? I'm assuming we cannot just turn it around and do it next year, but are we talking like 2 years, 3 years? And what else is on the schedule? So the TC can make a recommendation to the Assessment Science Committee. The Assessment Science Committee can then consider that recommendation along with the other assessments on the schedule over the next couple of years and recommend a time to add TTOG as a benchmark assessment, which would then come back to the policy board for the final approval on that front.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments on that update? Go ahead.
Yeah, just not anything to do with a Katie updated, but there is sort of the CDAR steering committee is meeting right now down in Charleston, maybe, I don't know, down south somewhere. And one of the species they're talking about is cobia. I've talked with a couple of you offline about this, and the lead analyst that was going to do the cobia work left NOAA Fisheries, and now they're in a hiring freeze. So there's a hiccup in the cobia assessment again. And it appears there's 2 options that are available. One is a 2006 update to the BAM model, which would be essentially a turn of the crank, but it wouldn't allow for consideration of some of the new tagging information and some of the new data streams that are available potentially for cobia. And the other option would be a full benchmark assessment, but that would not be done until 2008. You know, the cobia board right now is the projections that are used to manage cobia are based on assessments from 5 years ago, maybe, Katie-ish. So they're pretty old. So, you know, we're not going to have, it appears we're not going to have great scientific advice for short-term cobia management decisions. But what I've asked Pat Canfield, who's down at the CDAR steering committee, to ask for is can we get both rather than either or? Can we have both a 2006 BAM update and a benchmark in 2008? I don't know if there's capacity to do that through the CDAR process, but we'll see. So no decisions today, or no final news for the board today. We'll monitor that, see what a CDAR steering committee ends up. The South Atlantic Council will have a CDAR meeting at their meeting in the first week of March, and they'll review what comes out of this steering committee meeting. So, you know, more to follow. I just want to let folks know the cobia assessment work is still in limbo at best. So we'll see.
Well, I have a comment on that, and I don't know if any others do. I mean, we've been in some tough spots before, but for those of us that are involved in cobia management, what we're looking at is kind of petrifying. I mean, we're looking at maybe a decade out. I think maybe that update went, or the last assessment might have had a terminal year of like 2018. So we might not get a new assessment until after 2028. I think there's potential for that, especially if this is a completely recreational driven species, and we know that we need, or that we're going to be seeing another MRIC recalibration. And I personally don't know what value there would be to update it before that. So it's going to be very challenging, and we're going to have to get creative and possibly pretty conservative on how we handle that species for the next couple of years. Any other comments on cobia, or Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I share your concern, and it's pretty high profile species on top of it. So just two things. I think the reliance on a turn of the crank of BAM, if my memory serves me, we shouldn't be like super optimistic about that. I think there were troubling signals in the last time, and that sort of propagates into, and then we're relying on projections from that model. So I like the idea, even like coupling it directly, the benchmark and the update, if they can get somebody on board, I support that. And then the other, I think we maybe talked about this before, but we may want to think about a contingency and have some like data limited approaches run to patch us through as well. It's a lot to think about there, but those tend to be not as, they can be difficult to run, but the idea is it's data limited. There are simpler approaches, and it might be valuable to have that in our back pocket, depending on what plays out here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. And we have had a chance to at least have some of these discussions, although as Bob pointed out, we may get an update soon on what the potential is. Going past that, I think there may be a standing order as a task to see what can be done to provide information and guidance on management. So I think once we get past what information Pat could give us, then I think that would be kind of a standing order for that group on what management advice can be provided. And I think we've had that discussion at the pelagic board before. So thank you. Okay, not seeing any other hands. Then thank you, Katie. I think you're good. So the next item up is review of non-compliance findings. Fortunately, there aren't any, which also means no need for a business session following up after this. So I will ask this board, is there any other business to come before the board? Oh, yep, right. Yep, sorry. So I guess we're gonna go to Dan for a second.
So Cherie mentioned earlier at our executive committee meeting how a bunch of the states in the New England area, Rhode Island to Maine, got together Monday night to talk about the challenges that came about over the last month when the infamous Addendum 27 of the American Lobster Plan, which was passed in May of 2023 and then delayed twice to accommodate the challenges that the industry had, at the 11th hour, got basically scuttled because Maine announced that, or actually Commissioner Kelleher announced at a public hearing that he was going to withdraw the most significant rule, which was the minimum size increase. And then the New Hampshire governor jumped on board and said that her state wouldn't follow it. And that kind of left the third state in Area 1, mine, that already had regulations that were fully enacted. So we're going to have to go in and repeal those regs. Going forward, based on the proceedings of what occurred yesterday, which was the board voting to initiate a new addendum to withdraw or to replace certain aspects, essentially withdrawing that which Maine and New Hampshire decided together that they wanted to pull back on. So I have a motion that I'd like this policy board to approve, to request staff to write a letter to those two states and CC their respective governors. And it would be a combination of sort of information, criticism, and pledges of support to proceed with some form of lobster management going forward, but kind of put the onus on those two states to lead the way on developing those proposals, because I'm fearful and others are fearful that if we go through this kind of a process again and it becomes so political, even after states have enacted the regulations, it's really an unacceptable process. And so it was impressive to see the level of energy, I'm being euphemistic, the level of energy displayed at some of the main public hearings and the unfortunate disrespect toward Commissioner Kelleher. But I really think the onus is on those industry groups that have kind of risen up and demanded that they face no regulations, or at least not this particular regulations, to replace that with something different. So, and many of you will remember David Pierce, and I know he used to have really long motions, but I didn't mean to make it so long, but the motion essentially is the top paragraph, and then the 5 bullets are just some details that I would ask, that's part of this motion, to have the staff incorporate into the letter. And I know there's been some initial conversations among the folks who are on the lobster board about some minor changes. So shall I read the motion?
Before you read the motion, Dan, I think this doesn't reflect the final motion you wanted to make. So I can change the text before you read it if you would like to what you sent me.
Please do.
Okay.
And Joe, do you want to take any questions from the larger group while she's working on that?
Yeah, well, or comments or discussions from those that were on the lobster board, because the impacts and ramifications of this go well beyond on lobster. This is a very difficult decision. We were moving forward with, I think, not just proactive management, but I think doing so in a way that really may need to be part of our future management. And that is, vetting these issues through a public comment process, through our process, and then saying we're doing this through a set of triggers, and you all know what will happen if those triggers are hit. So it's an ability to act more quickly, which is something that we've all discussed. That was part of our climate scenario planning and how do we handle issues. And here we are backing away from something. So I I'm not going to just open questions up and say for Dan. I will say, you know, I'd open the discussion up to the floor, and it wouldn't be fair to just say that Dan will have to answer questions. But if there are questions, you know, we'll all do our best to answer them. So comments or questions on this motion? Yeah, I kind of had a feeling. All right, so I'll start with David and then Doug, and then there was another hand somewhere, but we'll go with David and Doug first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really brief comment. The comment that I heard from a lot of comment and concern that I heard from a lot of commissioners after that discussion was the need for us to set a deadline, include a deadline in this. And my suggestion is, I don't think it needs to be folded into the motion, but I think an appropriate deadline is by the annual meeting that these reports and actions would take place. So it sets some bounds on how long the discussion can go in these other jurisdictions. There are other ways we can address this. And if we're going to utilize some of those other methodologies, I think we need to know sooner rather than later.
Yeah, David, you know, it's up to the policy board regarding timelines. I think one of the difficulties for Maine might be that the benchmark assessment is not coming out until the annual meeting, and they may get some new information at that meeting that may, you know, their industry may want to consider as they're coming up with options to move forward. So, you know, I think Mr. Kelleher indicated he would give an update at each quarterly meeting moving forward. And, you know, we get a check in May and see where things are. And if you know, the lobster board feels things aren't moving fast enough, maybe that's a good time to chime in with, you know, something to move it along.
Follow up, Dave?
Yeah, it'd be perfectly acceptable to me to make that deadline the winter meeting, but we need a deadline in this. We need to set some bounds on this so that we get some action. We've given the industry the opportunity to put together the alternatives and bring back alternatives that allay some of their concerns. And if they haven't done it, then we have to figure out how to handle this and do what is correct for the resource. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I had a few hands up, and I'm going to go to them before I look for a you know, a possible motion. My intent was that I felt we could, and as we have many times, have the policy board move a letter forward through consent. But if there's an intent to change this motion, then we'll need a motion here. So, but before I look for that, I have several hands that I saw. So I'm going to go to Doug, and then Matt, and then Jeff Kalin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to make the policy board and those that were involved with this aware that, you know, we are in New Hampshire fully supportive of this motion and want to go back to the industry since we were put in a position where we'd already implemented the rules and now are going to have to remove them. And we recognize there's an issue. We tried to be proactive with this type of management, but now we're going to go back and have a discussion with the industry, as is Maine, which is really the elephant in this room, to see if there are other ways that we can accomplish the same goals here. And I just want you all to know that we're fully supportive and we will move as fast as possible with this, because we recognize that we do have a declining stock right now. We want to put something in place so that there will be a soft landing.
Thank you, Doug. Matt?
I have a question for Dan, actually. I understand putting the onus on Maine and New Hampshire industry to come up with a solution, but just wanted to ensure that the industry in Massachusetts, if something doesn't come up out of that discussion that's not acceptable in Massachusetts, and then we have another situation to deal with down the road. So I would just encourage all three industry from all three states to work together on this.
Fair point. But we've had so many experiences where negotiations are happening at a table like this board or the large whale take reduction team, and people go home and get ready to enact rules and one state just simply deviates from that. So I guess out of my frustration, I kind of wanted to put some of the industry groups and even the folks at highest levels of state government in those states that please, please, if you're going to have opposition, tell us before a process like this gets dragged out so far. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, my theme, and I said it yesterday, is you broke it, you own it. And so I do want to make sure my industry is involved in those conversations, but I don't want anybody to even perceive that, well, especially in Maine, that, well, the Massachusetts fishermen wanted this, so we don't want it. So I want them to originate that and then bring it forward.
Thanks. Yeah, and so Matt, I appreciate that, and I looked at this as, the idea behind this letter is just, it's the starting point before we go through, a whole new process of what is the baseline that we can work with for, a stock that needs, a new direction. So we have quite a few hands still. So I'm going to go to Jeff Kalin and then Megan Ware online.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't have my hand up, but I did have a question yesterday about bullet 3, and I had a chance to talk to Dan a little bit about it. The thing that makes me uncomfortable about this language that says that Maine, and I guess all those bullet points with New Hampshire would be added, of course, that Maine would sit down, New Hampshire would sit down with their industry and come up with a solution to become compliant with this addendum. That to me is the priority. It muddies the water, I think, to basically say that Maine and New Hampshire also need to start talking to the Canadian government about mutually agreeable conservation strategies. Like I said yesterday, I dealt with the Canadians for decades in my past life in the sardine business and salmon farming business. They're good people, but it's all about Canada up there. And I don't like the language in bullet 3 that seems to indicate we would wait around for Canada to come up with a mutually agreeable solution to our addendum being, our states being compliant with the addendum. So I don't know how to fix that, but that was my concern yesterday.
Jeff, great point. And let me just say that what I was hoping to accomplish there is that the conversations would begin with Canada well in advance of us ever seeing a proposed addendum. So what we heard in Canada I was close to Canada, Bar Harbor, with a lot of Canadians. Some of the Canadians kind of took offense to the fact that we kind of went up to Canada and asked them if they would consider gauge increases in the lobster fishing areas adjacent to Maine and the Gulf of Maine, that we went up there after we had done it. You know what I mean? It was almost a level of respect that they were looking for. So I'm suggesting that, like, for example, if we were to go to a 32nd inch increases instead of 1/16th, if we talk to Canada in advance, maybe they would embrace that. I don't mean all of Canada, but some of these LFAs that are seeing the same declines as Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass have seen over the last couple of years. So that's really the thought, is to try to bring them in early, but not make it a situation where if they didn't agree, then we wouldn't proceed.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. When we talked offline this morning, you made that clear to me. But this is an American lobster fishery. We're an American organization, and if they didn't realize that we were going down this road months ago, then somebody up there wasn't paying attention, frankly. So you can tell I'm not very sanguine with the Canadian attitude to American fishing. So I'll let you artfully, draft the letter, and I've made my reservations clear. So.
And Jeff, if I could, I'm just reacting to these press accounts that I'm seeing coming out of the states of Maine and New Hampshire that keep referencing different rules across the border. And So I'm just trying to sort of pay respect to that by having those conversations start
Well,
early.
like I said yesterday, we were in the same situation in 1982, and we went ahead and changed the damn gauge size, and they ended up buying our lobsters. So that's where we are today, I think, too. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I do appreciate that concern. I think part of this is that, the idea behind this is just to start a discussion, not that we will not take action until, this is lockstep action. So I hope that helps.
I appreciate that. It does. Thank you very much for letting me vent a little bit again.
I'm really fighting it. So we have a few more hands, and then I will ask if we're looking for, an amendment or substitution here. So I'm going to go to Megan Ware, and then Mike, did you have your hand? Yes, then Mike Louisi, and then Cherie. Okay, Megan?
Thanks, Joe. Just wanted to express Maine's full support for this motion and agree with Doug's comments that I think the two states are in support of receiving this letter. Understand the desire for some clarity on the timeline. I think what I might propose, or what I think would be helpful for Maine, is for us to be able to come to the Maine meeting with a bit of a strategy. We haven't had a chance yet internally to talk about how we want to navigate with the zone councils, the Lobster Advisory Council, our DMR Advisory Council. There's a lot of different bodies at play here in Maine. I think I personally would find it helpful to have a moment to kind of effectively strategize how we want to engage those groups when, and bring that to the board in May. If the board is not satisfied with the timeline we've put forward, then we'll take that feedback and try and make the changes as necessary. But I do understand why folks don't want this dragging on forever. I certainly don't want this dragging on forever. But I think it's about trying to plan and be efficient as we can. So that would be my suggestion.
Well, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. And I think moving forward, as much input that can happen and get to the full lobster board and then eventually policy board is important. I don't think we need to take any action on that suggestion. But I think, I'll look to see if there's any concern with that. If not, I think, that's a great idea on how to move forward. Not seeing any. So again, we're going to go to Mike Louisi and then Cherie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick and brief on this. I just wanted to put my thoughts out there on the record. So I supported this moving forward yesterday, but I did want to express how concerned and how uncomfortable I was just making that decision. I feel like we are tiptoeing on a razor's edge when it comes to what compliance with ISFMP is when we're dealing with this. And I realize there are extenuating circumstances here. We're dealing with another country. We have internal issues within the industry that need to be resolved. But if what transpired over the last few weeks with the letter writing from the governors of Maine and New Hampshire to the commission, if that wasn't non-compliance, I don't know what is non-compliance. And my concern as a commissioner and as an administrative commissioner in taking the steps that we're taking now, I feel like we'll be challenged even more by our stakeholders in every decision that's made as to whether or not we should have our governor write a letter to buy us time or to extend the I think it was 7 years, it was talked to 7 or 8 years this addendum was being worked on, to get to the last second and just say no. It really bothers me, and I hope and I think that with quick expedited handling of this situation to the point where something occurs, there's an action taken soon, will be much better than if this drags on for another couple years. I come from a state that is politically charged. We have a very passionate fishermen, and this to me kind of cracks the door open a little bit for those those questions and concerns about why and when and how we follow the guidance of ASMFC in moving forward in the actions that we take. So just wanted to put that out there, Mr. Chairman, but I plan to support this moving forward. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I mean, you spent a long time as council chair, so yeah, I mean, I think you understand, you know, my position here, which is it's an uncomfortable conversation, but what you said is, I think, 100% true and very important for every member of this board to understand that. If, again, because so many, you know, plenty of states aren't on the lobster board to understand what went into this decision, that we have states, you know, that have gone so far as to enact these regulations to protect a stock that we have concerns about, and then to be in this position. So it is, I agree, a precarious place to be. And I hope everyone appreciates that. So I'll go to Sheree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, I agree completely with your thoughts. Right now, New Hampshire is in compliance. We won't be out of compliance until July 1st, as well as Maine in regards to the gauge. We do have it on our books. We went through rulemaking processes that we always do, and then found out that that decision was reversed outside of our authority or outside of our knowledge until a letter came out. So I am with Megan. I completely assure this body that I will be addressing this with our lobster industry as soon as possible. I don't want to see this linger any more than anybody else. Again, I think that this is a tenuous spot to put ASMFC in. I admire this group of people, and I admire how the commission operates. And I'm sorry that we're at this level, at this juncture, and that as the administrative commissioner for New Hampshire, I intend to move as quickly as possible to resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Sheree. So I'm gonna ask, do we have a need to kind of, I guess, adjust what is in this motion, or are we at this point comfortable with this motion? And if so, I would believe that okay, thank you, David. I think if everyone's comfortable, then by consent, so I'll look for a hand for any objections. If not, then we'll move this letter forward. And, you know, there's a clock ticking, and you know, our intent is to keep this at the forefront and moving forward. I don't see any hands in objection, so in that case, by consent, we'll move this letter forward to Maine and New Hampshire, and I appreciate all that very much. We do have one other item of business, and I'm gonna turn to Chelsea to discuss the control date for the upcoming Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick update on some Mid-Atlantic Council happenings. So back in December, the Council and Policy Board approved the draft scoping document for the recreational sector separation and data collection amendment for summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish. During that discussion, some council members questioned if the council should ask the National Marine Fisheries Service to publish control dates for the recreational for-hire fisheries covered by this amendment. And this is an optional step that the council can take to limit speculative behavior in these fisheries if they believe that for-hire limited access options may need to be explored through this current amendment or through future action. And so at their upcoming meeting next week, the council is going to consider requesting that the National Marine Fisheries Service establish control dates for the recreational for-hire sectors. That meeting is on February 11th from 11 to 11:30 a.m. It is entirely virtual. And if this motion goes forward at the council, the control date does not commit the council to the development of a particular action to implement the control date. And there's a memo in the council's meeting materials that explains more for folks that are interested. This is not a joint meeting between the policy board and the council, but we have been notified that policy board members will be given priority to ask questions during that meeting. And then the last piece of update from Tracy and I is that last week we sent around a survey to the administrative commissioners about the for-hire permits for these 4 species in your state, and just to help us get a better understanding about how the impact, what the possible impacts of federal control dates could be on commission states. So if you haven't filled that out yet, please fill that out, within the next week or so, and we can, move forward from there. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you and Tracy for all the work you've done on this and for putting out that survey. I think that's a great idea and very helpful. And I fully admit I didn't fill it out yet. Sorry. Are there any questions for Chelsea or any comments on this notion? Jeff?
Yeah, thank you. So Chelsea, the actual control date doesn't end up being next week. It ends up being when the action is published in the Federal Register, which could be after the cows come home right now, given the state of politics in America right now. So is that right? I mean, we have to, once it's published, then that's the date, correct?
Yeah, correct. The control date is usually the date of the Federal Register notice, and there will be if it's published, a public comment period on that, but the council doesn't have to, I guess, use that. If they want to take action in the future, they don't have to use that date of the Federal Register notice. They could use a different date.
Yeah, okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think this is going to be a discussion on the, on what may be an appropriate date. And I'm not going to try and put Mike Ruccio on the spot, but is it, I mean, I thought that it's even possible to set a control date that's in the past, but with the discussion, and of course, the validity of that control date happens when it goes through the Federal Register. Go ahead, Mike. Thank you.
Testing my historic knowledge on control dates here. No, I think that's fair. Both can be true. So if the council's will is to select a date from some time past, their rationale will need to support that. If there isn't, then typically it's the date of publication. And then as as has been discussed here, as the process moves forward, if the council in its deliberations decides that a different date is what they want to use, again, their rationale will support it, and they can either go through formal reaffirmation of another control date, establishment of a new control date, or none of those options. It really kind of depends, but the control date functions largely as lay down a marker, a line in the sand. From this date, we may treat history differently. And that's really the extent of it. But we continue to be under a regulatory freeze. We are seeing some movement. I think we can now publish meeting notices for councils. We're hopeful that in seasons will be something that we can publish soon. And this usually kind of follows in a process as we gain more politicals. And I saw earlier that looks like Secretary Lutnick has been confirmed. So that's a good thing. And that might help even advance some of our rulemaking capabilities.
Great, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I think that is helpful. Yeah. So, this is I will say for the 100th time, I think what we have been trying to do with flounder and sea bass is kind of on the forefront of fisheries management, and it has been for years. And going through this process is part of that, and so yeah, to have folks paying attention, that because of sector separation, the idea that this control date could be important. So I think at least a discussion on that, which is what is going to be happening, is a good thing. So I don't believe we have any other items before us. But before I look for a motion to adjourn, I want to thank staff. I don't think I do that enough. I certainly try to, but I want to thank staff for all the work that was done. I think this was a very positive meeting. I'm glad everyone that is here was able to make it, and I want to wish everyone safe travels home. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. I see Malcolm Rhodes, a second by Doug Grout. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Take care.